Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my fifth podcast with me, Matt Houlihan. And this episode, I'd like to talk about British television comedy, particularly the kind of comedy which influenced me as a youngster and informs my comedic sensibilities. I think there's something particularly unique about British humour and the comedy culture here, which I think has informed the world. To get a sense of the heritage of comedy and satire and perspective that British culture has created, I'd have to look back since the Second World War and say that that whole half century had a huge influence up until that point, all the way back to the Goons show, the Ealing comedies, post-war reconstruction, carry-on films, all of this absurdist, tongue-in-cheek, double entendre, satirical new wave, which went on to become Monty Python and Beyond the Fringe, informed a very particular tradition of irreverence and insightfulness that often isn't present in many other parts of the world, from my perspective. In this episode, I'll begin a discussion about British comedy with reference to the early part of the 20th century, the foundations. And next episode, I will chat about the last few decades of British comedy, where it's gone, where it's going. So be sure to listen to next one to complete the duo. Historically, the first big influence on me would be Charlie Chaplin. Given that Charlie was British, grew up in South London like myself, I feel a particular kinship to him and the tragicomedy which he brought to his filmmaking. He came from a tradition of music hall, which is very particularly British. I can't mention music hall without talking about Mary Lloyd, the queen of cheekiness and double entendre. Mary Lloyd pioneered a boldness, a cheekiness, a musicality in all sorts of funny, naughty songs which implied all sorts of things without explicitly saying them. And Max Miller, the cheekiest, sweetest, most intimate confidant of the audience, with double entendres which he didn't have to finish, with blue jokes that he was clever enough not to be obvious with. The theatricality, the combining of music and song and gossipy stories and jokes is what really entertained and still entertains British audiences. The naughtiness without being snide or smart, the bringing in of the audience into your confidence and making them do the work of imagining what you're getting at. That is an art form, and that is a very British form of humour, the double entendre, the implying of so much without actually saying it. And maybe that's got to do with the censorship laws that the UK used to have in terms of the Lord Chamberlain and public decency. But it's a very clever, very sweet way of getting around it by inviting the audience's imagination. And Max Miller did that in spades, and he was a most colourful character, and women loved him.
Even though the skies are grey above you, they won't be grey for very long. Soon you'll see the blue skies up above you, if you keep singing this song. Oh, isn't it great to see someone smile? A smile is the thing that makes life worthwhile. I'm going to catch my train, so until we meet again, a happy-go-lucky, happy, happy smile. Goodbye now, a happy-go-lucky, happy, happy smile.
As with so much, everything changed with the Second World War, and the first proper British comedy TV phenomenon was the series of films shot at Ealing Studios in the 40s onwards called the Ealing Comedies. The most famous and celebrated Ealing comedies would be Passport to Pimlico, Whiskey Galore, Kind Hearts and Coronets, The Lavender Hill Mob, The Man in the White Suit, the Lady Killers. And notable actors who became regulars in these films were Alec Guinness, the very famous British actor and a particular favourite of mine, who played Obi-Wan Kenobi in his later years and also starred in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the original series, and Alistair Sim. Kind Hearts and Coronets really stands out for me as an incredible tour de force of performance. Alec Guinness played, I think it was 9 separate members of the same family. And I remember it being said that, unlike a lot of actors who work from the outside in terms of their appearance and becoming a character, Alec worked from the inside out, shifting his face, shifting his internal posture to become the character. And it is quite startling to see the many genders and ages and backgrounds of the characters which he played in Kind Hearts and Coronets. I recommend it to anyone. The Lavender Hill Mob is a wonderful post-war film with iconic status now. Very funny. Wonderful performance from Alistair Sim, who famously played Scrooge in the 50s, I think. Watch it. Passport to Pimlico is like a window into the late 40s, the post-war world. You might see a film like The Third Man, starring Orson Welles, set in post-war Vienna and the despair there. If you look at Passport to Pimlico, you'll see a similar world in post-war London, but there's certainly an optimism, and there's certainly a brightness and an energy which really gives you a sense of the new world that people wanted to create after the war. You really get a sense of that in Passport to Pimlico, the ruins and the people who were creating a new world. Next, The Goon Show with Spike Milligan and Harry Seacombe and Peter Sellers. They met in the war as soldiers and became entertainers and developed a particular anarchic sensibility which entertained people throughout the 50s and onwards. The humour was surreal, ludicrous, absurd, plenty of strange sound effects. They really took advantage of the power of radio to feed the imagination. I think a lot of people owe a great debt of thanks to people like the original Goons. On a similar vein, many of the same generation of actors and writers came about at the same time, including the creators of Round the Horn, another BBC radio comedy programme. The series was created by Barry Took and Marty Feldman and starred Kenneth Horne, Kenneth Williams, who was also serving in the war and became an entertainer, Hugh Paddick, Betty Marsden and Bill Pertwee. The genre was sketch comedy, and it was a particularly bold programme because it was the first to really introduce the idea of gay culture into popular consumption and double entendre humour, which touched on unspoken, illegal concepts of sexuality.
Hello, anybody there?
Oh, hello, I'm Julian and this is my friend Sandy.
Oh, hello.
It was a very anarchic, absurd, fast-paced programme which, again, developed an influence in the 50s, around the same time as the very first Carry On movies were created. The Carry On films became a sort of self-mocking extravaganza, and they extended from the cheeky politeness of the 50s through the 60s and all the social change there, all the way up to the frankly filthy 70s, where they were just pushing the boat to all sorts, including the infamous Emmanuel episodes, where it was essentially soft pornography. The tongue-in-cheek humour which characterised the Carry On films was also present in many other iconic film and TV programmes, most notably On the Buses, where literally dirty old men were flirting with young 20-something nubile women, and we were expected to believe it. With Carry On, you always get the sense that there's a sweet innocence despite the sexuality, despite all the comings and goings of the characters, there was something very delightful, funny, and, dare I say, innocent about it. The Carry On franchise really developed from the very first film, which was Carry On Sergeant in 1958. And again, it developed from the traditions of music hall and the bawdiness of British seaside postcards. It was full of tongue-in-cheek and mocked many of the genres and types of entertainment on TV and film at the time, including westerns and adventure stories and programs about the NHS and period dramas and things like that. Famously, the early NHS was represented in Carry On Nurse. The cast is a huge list, including Kenneth Williams, the famously camp actor, Joan Sims, Charles Hawtrey, Sid James, Hattie Jakes, Barbara Windsor, Leslie Phillips, Ding Dong, and all that bunch. It was a huge influence on people. What are your thoughts? Are there comedy shows that I haven't mentioned that you think deserve a shout out? How do you feel comedy has developed in this country? How do you feel about the comedy which has developed in North America over the last 50 odd years? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you feel as though theatre has kept up with the current demands of culture? Well, thank you for listening, ladies and gents, and I hope to have you subscribe to my SoundCloud. Also follow me on YouTube, on my YouTube channel with all my sketches and writing, Matthew Houlihan. Thank you and goodbye.